For many, many years, PSG were football's greatest paradox. They had the money, they had the stars, they had the biggest city in football, and yet they couldn't win that one trophy that mattered the most. Not when they had Zlatan, not when they had Neymar, not when they had Mbappe, not even when they assembled perhaps the most outrageously talented front three that football has ever seen, with Messi, Neymar and Mbappe all wearing the shirt at the same time. Every season began with the same expectation, this would be the year, and every season seemed to end the same way, a collapse. Year on year, it was just a new chapter in a growing catalogue of European heartbreak. For more than a decade, PSG tried to buy their way to the summit of European football, and for more than a decade, Europe kept reminding them that football doesn't work that way, it's not that simple. Until something changed, quietly at first and almost unnoticed. The club stopped chasing celebrities. They stopped building marketing campaigns, stopped collecting superstars, and started building a real football team. And now, after back-to-back Champions League triumphs, PSG stand where they always believed they belonged, at the top of Europe. The question is no longer whether PSG can win the Champions League, the question is much bigger. Are we witnessing the beginning of football's next great dynasty? To answer that, we need to go back to where it all started. Over recent years, it's becoming a bit easy to forget, but before 2011, PSG weren't viewed as a top team in Europe. They were an important French club, a respected club, a club of history, but they were never a giant, not a club that belonged in conversations with Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Manchester United. Despite representing one of the world's most influential cities, Paris had spent decades living below their potential, and then came the moment that changed everything. In 2011, Qatar Sports Investments purchased the club. What followed wasn't simply an ownership change, it was one of the most ambitious projects football had ever seen. The objective wasn't just to improve PSG. The objective was to transform PSG into one of the biggest clubs and brands on the planet, a global sporting institution, a Champions League winner, and eventually the face of modern football itself. Money flooded into the club, new players arrived, new expectations arrived alongside them. The sleeping giant of French football had finally awakened. Almost immediately, the transformation began. Thiago Silva, Marco Verratti, and then came Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and suddenly PSG weren't just relevant, they were unavoidable. Every transfer window felt like a statement to the world of football. Every summer brought another headline, every year the club grew bigger. France quickly became their kingdom, but Europe remained uncharted territory, and that would become an obsession for them. The first phase of the PSG project revolved around star power, and no player embodied that era better than Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Bigger than life, bigger than Ligue 1, sometimes it felt like he was bigger than PSG itself. With Zlatan leading the line, PSG began to dominate French football. League titles became routine, domestic cups piled up, the gap between Paris and the rest of France grew wider every season. But in Europe, something was missing. Quarterfinals felt like a ceiling for them, the dream remained distant, so PSG did what PSG always did. They simply doubled down and spent even bigger. And then came the summer that changed football, the Neymar transfer. £222 million, still the most expensive transfer in football history. The move wasn't just about signing another superstar, it was a declaration that PSG were no longer competing with Europe's elite, they believed they had become the elite, and alongside Neymar arrived a teenage phenomenon named Kylian Mbappe. Suddenly PSG possessed two of the most valuable players on earth, the future had arrived. Well, at least that's what everyone thought. What followed was a strange contradiction. The squad became more talented, but somehow the team became more fragile. Then came the disasters, the infamous collapse against Barcelona, a 4-0 first leg lead somehow evaporating at the Camp Nou, the 6-1 defeat, La Remontada, one of the greatest comebacks in football history and one of the darkest nights in PSG history, and then Manchester United, a depleted United side overturning a first leg deficit in Paris. Then came Real Madrid, again and again and again. Each year the names got bigger but the results stayed the same, and eventually PSG assembled the ultimate collection of stars, Messi, Neymar and Mbappe, three global icons, three Ballon d'Or level talents. On paper it looked unstoppable. But in reality it always felt like it was strangely incomplete, there was something missing. Because football history repeatedly teaches us all the same lesson. Talent wins matches, teams win trophies, and PSG still were not a team. Eventually, reality became impossible to ignore. The formula wasn't working. The club had spent years collecting superstars and still had no Champions League trophy to show for it. The project had reached a crossroads. Continue down the same path or start again. To PSG's credit, they chose the harder option, because changing direction meant abandoning everything the project had been built on. The glamour, the celebrity, the obsession with stars. One by one, the icons departed. Messi left first, then Neymar, and eventually Mbappe followed. For many observers, this should have marked the end, the beginning of PSG's decline. Instead, it became the beginning of their rise. At the centre of that transformation stood one man, Luis Enrique. When PSG appointed Enrique, they weren't simply hiring a coach, they were hiring an architect, someone capable of building an identity, and someone capable of creating structures where chaos had existed. For the first time in years, PSG had a football vision, not a commercial one, not a branding one, a football vision, and everything began to change. The new PSG looked completely different, not because they lacked the talent they possessed before, but because the talent was no longer the priority. Fit was, profile was, character. The club began targeting players who enhanced the collective, players willing to run, press, sacrifice, adapt. Vitinha, João Neves, Bradley Barcola, Desiree Doué, Achraf Hakimi, Nuno Mendes, Kvicha Kvaratskhelia, individually excellent, collectively devastating. For years, PSG had asked one question: who is our superstar? Now they asked a different question: who improves the system? It seems like a subtle difference, but it changes everything. Under Luis Enrique, PSG became one of Europe's most intense pressing teams, one of its most flexible tactical teams, and one of its most cohesive units. And eventually now, safe to say, it's one of the best. The breakthrough has finally come. The Champions League trophy that had haunted the club for over a decade was theirs last year, and then came the second this year, and suddenly the narrative has changed completely. For years, PSG were the club that couldn't get over the line, and now they're the team that everyone else is trying to catch. So now we arrive at the most important question. What actually makes a dynasty? One great season won't be enough. One Champions League isn't enough. Even two isn't always enough. A dynasty is sustained dominance, the ability to remain at the summit while everyone else tries to drag you down. And for the first time in their history, PSG appear equipped to do exactly that. Their core is young. Many of their best players haven't even reached their peak. Their recruitment strategy is clearer than ever, their manager is fully aligned with the club's sporting direction, and unlike previous PSG teams, the squad doesn't appear dependent on an individual. It's built on a system, and systems tend to last longer than individuals. Of course, nothing is guaranteed, football moves quickly, injuries can happen, rivals may improve. History is filled with teams that look destined to dominate before disappearing just as quickly. But this PSG team does feel quite different, not because they spend more money, not because they have bigger names, but because they finally seem to understand what made them fail for so long. The first PSG project was built to create attention. This PSG project is built to win. For 15 years, PSG chased the Champions League. They spent billions searching for the perfect formula, and in the end, they discovered something almost ironic. The secret wasn't finding bigger stars, it was building a better team. The first era of PSG created a super club, the second era created champions, and if the current trajectory continues, if this young core continues to develop, if Luis Enrique remains, which it looks like he will, then years from now we may look back at these back-to-back Champions League victories as more than just trophies. We may look back at them as the moment a dynasty was born.